folks. I'm Donald Standeford. Like, subscribe, follow. Check out my Rumble page if you wish. Today I'm going to do a little reading, a little poetry, a little commentary, a little politics. At the end, I have a really interesting and shocking news about Dr. Fauci. And I'll put that at the end. Here we go. The serpent hisses, kisses, kisses. Place Aslan upon the rocks in a heap. Find me my sacrificial knife. Am I not Lucifer? Did I not deserve recompense for the sins committed against me by God? I shall not seek only one. I shall seek double for my trouble. I shall seek my revenge upon both God and man. Let my wrath culminate in the murder of the Son of Man who dare challenge me upon Galilee. Put the lion Aslan upon the rock and find me my crooked dagger now. Son of God and the living word, we are fighting. We shall overcome. My people must pray according to their knowledge of God and their problem. Kim Clement says the crisis is China, and it appears that way. It is of China and the dollar, of sexual addiction, of threats, blackmail, and drug addiction, of fentanyl poisoning, children traded in sex rings. God has had it up to here. A surprise attack? No surprise for me. No shock to others who also trusted in the prophecies. God saw it when we hadn't a clue. For God's prophets see wicked people who think themselves anonymously plotting evil in dark rooms. For God's prophets are taken in the spirit to the enemy's camp, or anywhere the enemy meets to plot. So God saw our need years ago and prepared for it with his ample provision. Adam gazes at his pain through the eyes of self-pity. No delusion could soften the suffering of his shame. He couldn't even keep pride from controlling his heart. He had nothing to be proud of. The pride still appeared full force. It depressed him. It worried him. It exposed his already weakened resolve. Adam knew what living without pride was. Now he knew how to live without honor. He had been true, perfect, but he had been humbled. Pride had no part with God. God hated pride, so Adam also should abhor it. Still, it gushed up inside him like a sickness. How can sin be destroyed in his descendants if it so distressed one who formerly was pure? Adam already knew perfect health in body, spirit, and mind. If sin crept up so quietly in him, how much simpler his descendants could be deceived. He was induced to call sin goodness and righteousness sin. How much more they who knew only how to be fallen. In the shadows sin could hide. Lust could starve as if fixed to waylay a man of God. Strange hunger struck from shadowy holes and niches and corners with bitter pains. The thirst even Adam had no abiding relief. Perhaps thirst instructed sinners to strive against a hellish consequence. How could such a human hope to satisfy God if sin lingered so near? It could indeed attack from the gloomy pits of hell. Adam knew truth fully. Sin once had to persuade him. Sin had to, the first time, look him in the eye and, with a strong face, sell itself to him, and then it had to close the deal. How could I be so foolish? If I were God, I'd have gotten rid of me and created someone else already. Once greatness ran in my footsteps as I boldly strode ahead. I had all I craved. I enjoyed only what I had. I was a force to be looked upon, a force to be dealt with. No beast in the jungle dare face me. No man whom I ever produced and raised could have bested me on his strongest day. All for me then was child's play. Now I'm drained. I have murdered myself, and the pride overcomes me, and then it chuckles at my fate. Fate crushed my strength. I let it. I weigh what's left of the waters of life in me. The wells break. One by one they crack. I am advised when the last one bursts, I will finally succumb to death. Of all humanity, I merely and Eve saw perfection. Our chances at life soared. It was not possible to fail. What will my children do? Most will never even know me. How will they learn to sin or not to sin, or to know the wicked from the righteous? My own sons and daughters know me, and I know my experiences cannot be taught. I roared once, lion and lord over all things created. That unmentionable serpent brought me to my knees. So Satan will be an exception. Now he rules my world instead of me. When in Eden, did my faith ever forsake me? I have no sorrows worse than my regrets. Never have I been so confused. My faith in God was my compass. I end up weak, ruined, a jackal with a bark instead of a roar. I gaze into the mirror of a smooth lake skin. Myself sickens and abhors me. Creatures fear what I might do, but they buck and hide. They avoid me. All creatures, great and small, I hate them one and all. I cannot live with hate, but I cannot live without it. I am wrong. Courage would have strength to save Eve. I should have been the one to hang upon the tree for her, to reverse her dark defeat. Instead, we both live in disappointment, ready to die. And I can hardly talk of it or even mention it without the hurt or the hate raging within me. I once blazed like a sun, but this world has seen and felt the last of my life. Should not I be stretched on the cross for Eve, whipped, a crown of thorns stuck into my skull? Holy God declared a Savior would be born of Eve. Where do I fit in? What about me? I was so much stronger. I could have suffered and died for her, and all of them, the unborn too. Instead, I too fell. I never knew how it felt to be alone. In one dark hour, I ended my eternal day. I, the keystone, murdered myself. I murdered humankind. Promised you that if you sat through my little spiel that I would tell you a little bit about Dr. Fauci. I've actually been working on a piece that is longer that I was thinking about combining with this one, but I thought you should know the facts. About Dr. Fauci. I feel I should tack on to this podcast a few separate comments. One concern I learned of tonight is December 29th, I think, is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., son of the late assassinated Robert Kennedy, has just exposed Anthony Fauci in his recent book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Robert Kennedy Jr. reveals in his best-selling book, which I purchased on Amazon. The Amazon Kindle is pretty cheap. I paid a little bit more and got the Audible book. I haven't listened to it yet. Anyway, Robert Kennedy Jr. reveals in his best-selling book that in NIAID-funded experiments, foster children, now you remember his little thing with dogs, how he was taking dogs and torturing them, putting their puppies' faces, forcing them into, put their head into a little box that had insects in it that would eat their head while they were alive for a month. Really sick stuff. Well, it's about to get sicker. In The Real Anthony Fauci, Robert Kennedy Jr. reveals NIAID-funded experiments, foster children, were used as guinea pigs for an HIV experimental drug treatment program. Now, this might be overseas, you might think, in Africa. I don't know if that's comforting or not. Maybe it shouldn't be. But that's not the case here. Dr. Anthony Fauci, according to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., oversaw this heinous experiment that would kill at least 10 children, and probably dozens. No worries, they were foster children, orphans. Evidently, Fauci felt that they were of no consequence. They were trying to establish what the correct dose would be for the medication, so I suppose that's what was killing them. Nobody knows yet the extent of this abuse of orphaned children. I cannot believe that a man called Dr. Fauci, whom we pay the highest salary of any federal employee, and whom we give the greatest respect to, could be involved, and not be involved, but to run this horrid program. These were American girls and boys, unprotected orphans, vulnerable to the state that should have been protecting them. This was a horrible abuse on the city, on the state, and on the federal levels. And I don't know which other cities are involved, or other countries. Our own United States government did this to our own children. And you trust them with this vaccine? This is Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. here we're talking about. This is not Donald Trump's book. This is Democrat Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote this book about the real Anthony Fauci. Our own United States government hired this insane monster to do this. Fauci will retire on $350,000 a year, the largest annual retirement package of any federal employee, while the small businesses are trying to stay afloat after being hit by this COVID crisis time after time. This amount, $350,000 a year, ironically increases yearly to keep up with inflation. It should increase a lot with Biden in the White House. Thanks to Democrat Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for going against the grain and researching and writing this exposure of one guilty of crimes against humanity, Dr. Fauci. You won't hear this in the news. Anyway, leave your comments about Dr. Fauci, but please also leave your comments about my little piece. This is actually part of a book I'm working on. I'm giving you a preview. I'll have another piece out. And also, I've got something more coming about Fauci as soon as I can get it done. Thank you, and have a nice evening, day, whatever it is for you.